Y'all, last week, let's finish well. There's a lot that I really don't want you guys to miss from this text. I hate that I have to leave y'all this way, but I'm glad that we're at least going to be able to dig into the text a little bit, even if it's just remotely like this. But anyway, second half of chapter 9, George MacDonald, C.S. Lewis still talking about some theological issues, the nature of heaven and hell, why the ghosts choose hell instead of heaven, because they want to reign in hell rather than serve in heaven. Who is saying thy will be done to who? And in the second half, I want to focus on a slide that really we've looked at multiple times before. And that's the idea that our lives here on earth are just small reflections of something much bigger than ourselves. So remember that if we see at the top of this graph, life in the objective reality, we can't fully understand that. We can't see it in full. And so what happens is that through our lives, through our art, through the stories that we read, through what we can understand about the world around us, we get kaleidoscopic reflections of that. So we get small snippets that help us to get a glimpse of something bigger. And glimpse is that key word. It helps us to get a glimpse of something bigger than ourselves, even if we can't see the full picture. So like in Leaf by Niggle, the light would have been the full picture. It was that backcountry that he was trying to create, but he couldn't do it, at least when he was living on Earth, just like we can't. We can't get the full picture of the truth. However, we get little glimpses of it, like Niggle's leaf. He had this one small leaf that he created that allowed him to get a glimpse of something bigger than himself until he was able to see it in full. And so chapter 9 really focuses on that same premise. And George MacDonald and C.S. Lewis make the claim that hell is choosing to prefer the reflection over the light itself. So choosing hell is choosing to be content with the kaleidoscopic reflection of the light rather than chasing after the source of the light. And there's a great quote on page 86, and we'll get to it a little bit later in the slide, but where one of the ghosts, or one of the solid spirits talking to a ghost about what heaven is like, says the glory flows into everyone, the glory being the light, the reality, God. The glory flows into everyone and back from everyone like light and mirrors. It's reflected. But the light's the most important thing. The light's the thing. The reflections are beautiful. They help you get glimpses of the light, but the most important thing is the light itself. And so what we see in the second half of chapter 9 is that hell is preferring the reflection rather than the reality, preferring the reflection rather than the source of light. And so I want us to think of it very similar to the way we thought about Leaf by Niggle. And to start with, that's that our work, our lives, and everything that we can understand about this world are all small snippets that reflect something bigger and more whole than ourselves. So remember, our job is to be seekers of truth. And the truth is the ultimate reality. It's the thing that we want to comprehend. It's the light itself. But we can't fully see the truth on this side of eternity. We can't get the full picture and understand all the ins and outs and see clearly. We see through a mist. We see in the twilight. And our work, our lives, and really everything that we can see, it creates in us this longing for something bigger than ourselves. That's the Sehnsucht. It creates in us a longing for the backcountry. When we read stories like Princess and the Goblin or The Hobbit or The Great Divorce, it stirs in us something that we're like, man, I want to see the full picture. I want to see the backcountry. But all that we can see are little leaves, like Niggle could paint. So hell, if that's the case, hell is choosing to be content with the reflection rather than the light. Hell is choosing to be content with the little leaf that Niggle painted rather than using that leaf to make you long to see the full picture. Another way of putting it is just what this diagram has. Hell is being content with the kaleidoscopic refractions of the light rather than saying, oh, that's really beautiful. I'm going to use that to make me long for the light itself and to just be content with the little pieces that we have. And the question that I think a lot of us have is, well, that would be stupid. Why would you ever do that? Why would you be content with the small glimpse of something instead of using that glimpse to make you long for something more? And we see a couple answers to that at the end of chapter 9. We get 3 ghosts, and they each appear very briefly, and then George MacDonald and C.S. Lewis talk about them. The first one is the grumbler. She's an old lady, and she appears to a solid spirit. They're walking together, and it's really only like a page, but she's grumbling about how she was treated on Earth. She's like, oh, they practically killed me in that nursing home. They neglected me, yada, yada, yada. And she keeps grumbling. And if you jump to the diagram here at the bottom, what I want us to see with this is that kind of recreating this diagram here, that there is a solution to her grumbles, and the solution is God, right? Is Christ. However, she is content with the grumble itself, right? She is content. The grumble should lead you to long for the solution to the grumble. If you're discontent with something, you should long for the contentment, for the thing that will satisfy that discontentment. If there's a key in your heart, the Zeinzucht, that means that there is a lock somewhere. But the grumbler becomes consumed with her own grumbling, right? She's very content to just grumble and not actually use that grumble to point her to something bigger than herself. And George MacDonald says on page 77, he says, all we need, basically, he says, if there's one wee spark under all those ashes, we'll blow it till the whole pile is red and clear. If there's one part of her that says, you know what, maybe I'm not content with this grumble. Maybe I should be looking for the solution to this grumble or to this issue. Then there's still hope for her, right? There's still hope. And it reminds me of Jekyll and Hyde. The more he feeds Hyde, the more Hyde begins to take over, right? But if there's one small part of him that can still long to be made whole and long to be made right, then there's hope for him. And so the grumbler is one small picture of what it looks like to prefer to be content with the reflection rather than to be looking for the light. She's content with her discontentment rather than looking for a solution. We get another ghost a couple pages later, the flirtatious ghost. And she's dancing, she's writhing her body, she's trying to look attractive. Her desire is to be sexually attractive to these solid spirits. And C.S. Lewis is such a savage. He says it would have been more attractive for a corpse to smear lipstick and start dancing than for her to be, thinking she could be attractive to these solid spirits. And again, we get another ghost here who's preferring the kaleidoscopic reflection rather than the source of light, right? So God's image is the reality that we are made in God's image, that we are beautiful creatures, that we are attractive creatures. And instead of using her sexuality and her desire to be attractive as something that makes her think, wow, there's a God that made me like this, right? There's a reality, which is that that God created us as his creatures, as beautiful, attractive creatures. She's content to expose her own image, right? She's content with trying to bring all of the desire into herself. And so again, we get a ghost who is contenting herself with the reflection rather than the light. Instead of using her own attractiveness, her own sexual desire as something to draw her towards the beautiful image out of which she was created, she's content with the reflection of that, her own image. And she's content to just have the glimpse instead of the whole. The last ghost that we get, and he's the longest one at the end of chapter 9, is the artist. And he desires to represent the reality. So what he wants to do is he wants to paint the backcountry. He's just like Nigel. He's pretty much just Nigel written into the Great Divorce. But what we see with him, and he goes back to the Grey Town as well, what we see with him is that he doesn't actually want the reality. He wants glimpses of the reality. And it doesn't make any sense, right? It doesn't make any sense, but we also resonate with that. And what the solid spirit says to this ghost is the solid spirit says, when you painted on earth, at least in your earlier days, it was because you caught glimpses of heaven in the earthly landscape. The success of your painting was that it enabled others to see the glimpses too. But here you have the thing itself. It's just like Nigel. Nigel painted his leaf to get glimpses of the full picture. And the ghost is saying, hey, you now have the full picture. You can stop looking. You can stop painting. Because the whole purpose of your painting was to represent something bigger than you, was to give a little glimpse of something more whole and more real than you or than any of this. But the artist says, well, what would I paint then? Right? What would I paint? He doesn't realize that his search could be ended, that he could see the total picture, that he could see the light. And instead, he contents himself with continuing to paint, right? And it's not actually a leaf, but I'm using that as a relationship to Leaf by Nigel. He's content to try and represent the reality instead of to embrace the reality itself. Two other ghosts that we see this with, just to give more examples, the bishop. Instead of answers, he wants the reflected search for answers. He wants glimpses of the answers instead of the answers themselves. For the big man, instead of justice, God is a God of justice. He wants his own perverted justice. He wants glimpses of justice instead of actually getting his rights, right? He wants to get his rights instead of actually pursuing a God who's completely just and completely good. And so I'm going to go back to this. Hell is preferring the reflection rather than the reality. Hell is preferring to accept the glimpse of something and say, this is good enough for me, rather than having that glimpse point you to something much bigger and much wholer and much more real. George MacDonald ends pretty much on page 82 where he says, those who hate goodness are sometimes nearer to the truth than those who know nothing at all about it and think they have it already. Really interesting statement here, and I think it's one that's very true. Those who hate goodness are sometimes nearer than those who know nothing at all about it but think they have it already. And a good way to think about this is if you love darkness, but at least you know you're in the dark, you can be shown the light, right? If you love darkness, but you know, hey, I'm in darkness, and you might like it, but you're in the dark, you can be shown that there is such a thing as light. Now, whether you accept it or not, it's a different thing. What's most dangerous of all is being in the darkness and thinking that you're in the light, is being content with a reflection and thinking you have the full light. That's what's most dangerous of all. And so that's what George MacDonald says when he says, those who hate goodness are sometimes nearer to it than those who know nothing at all about it and think they have it already. It makes me think of someone who is completely against Christianity, completely against it, may honestly be closer to realizing that they were wrong and coming to the light than someone who, may have read one or two Bible verses and says, oh yeah, I get it, I believe, but they're so far from the truth because they already think they have it. They're not looking for anything. So a really powerful quote there. What I want to end with, and there's just too much to cover adequately, so I feel like I haven't done a great job with this, is I like this picture, and kind of a little anecdote to end with is, again, our lives are like looking in the water. We see the reflection. We can't quite see the full picture. We're like Nigel. We get glimpses, but all we can do is paint a leaf. But with that reflection, if you look in the water and you see the reflection of that mountain, you should say, wow, that is beautiful. And you should then go look for the mountain itself. You should look for the real thing. You shouldn't say, wow, that reflection is beautiful, and then jump in and drown. Hell is choosing the reflection rather than pursuing the reality. Hell is choosing to be content with the reflection itself and say, wow, this reflection of the mountain is so beautiful, jumping in to grab it and drowning, instead of saying, wow, this reflection is so beautiful, now I'm going to pursue the real thing, and trusting that one day you will see it in full. So I want y'all to think about that. What might it be that you are pursuing, or being content with the reflection of it rather than seeing the full thing? Feel the Zions up, feel that longing, because that's pushing you up into the high country.